Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a really fascinating historical contradiction. We're going to look at the hypermodern, globally connected Japan that millions of tourists flock to today, and contrast that with its hidden 200-year history of absolute, total lockdown.
Seriously, how does an isolated island nation manage to swing like a massive pendulum between fierce isolation and heavy foreign integration, only to eventually emerge as a global superpower? Well, it's an incredible story of dramatic societal shifts, human migration, and just unparalleled resilience.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving through 6 defining eras: the early imperial court, the rise of the samurai, 2 centuries of isolation, the Meiji Restoration, Empire and World War, and we'll wrap up with the economic miracle. Let's dive in. Part 1. The Early Imperial Court. Our story kicks off with early human settlers in the Yamato region, who eventually built a centralized power structure around the 3rd century AD. And this marks our very first massive swing of the pendulum outward. You see, Japan's early imperial court was profoundly shaped by adopting systems directly from mainland Asia. They fully embraced Buddhism back in 552, completely restructured their politics to mirror Chinese models with the Taika reforms in 645, and set up a grand capital in Kyoto by 794. Basically, they borrowed heavily from their neighbors to forge their first unified state. Part 2. The Rise of the Samurai and Decentralization. Now, what's really interesting here is the internal power shift. Over time, the emperor's court lost its grip on the countryside, which gave rise to these incredibly powerful regional warrior clans. So military rule under the shogunate officially begins in 1192 when Yoritomo takes control as shogun. But almost immediately, this new government gets put to the ultimate test: back-to-back invasion attempts by Kublai Khan's massive Mongol Empire in 1274 and 1281. And here's where things get wild. Nature literally bailed out the outnumbered samurai. Sudden, incredibly violent typhoons swept through and totally wiped out the Mongol invaders, not just once, but twice. It's absolutely no wonder these legendary storms became known as the kamikaze or divine wind. The samurai survived, but the psychological threat of the outside world was now firmly planted in the Japanese mindset. Fast forward through a couple centuries of intense civil wars among regional warlords, and in 1543, that pendulum swings outward once again. A Portuguese ship blows off course and introduces European gunpowder to the traditional samurai battlefield. Imagine that clash of eras, traditional blades and bows suddenly going up against European muskets, a total game changer. Just to put into perspective how ridiculously fast this foreign technology disrupted the status quo, by 1556, just over a decade later, there were over 300,000 of these firearms flooding Japanese battlefields. And the Portuguese traders didn't just bring weapons either. They brought Christianity, offering lucrative trade deals and military support to converts, which completely rewrote the rules of power in Japan. Part 3. 2 centuries of isolation. All right, so after endless warfare, warlords who took advantage of that foreign tech, most notably Tokugawa Ieyasu, finally reunify the country around the year 1600. And once unification is locked down, the pendulum violently swings back inward. In 1639, the new shogunate triggers a harsh, total lockdown policy called sakoku. For the next 268 years, Japan completely insulated itself from the outside world. The rules were intense. They deliberately severed almost all global ties. No outsiders in, no Japanese citizens allowed out. They made it illegal to even build ocean-going ships and completely outlawed Christianity to stop ideological influence. Their only European contact was a tiny handful of Dutch traders, restricted to an artificial island called Dejima. But here's the crazy part. Protected from global conflicts, the local economy actually boomed. In this vacuum, a highly unique culture flourished, and the population essentially doubled to 30 million people. Part 4. The Meiji Restoration and Forced Opening. Of course, that prosperous peace couldn't last forever. By the 19th century, the isolated shogunate was deeply struggling with famines and a stagnating economy. So when U.S. warships, led by Commodore Perry, rolled up in 1853 demanding open ports, Japan's outdated defenses just couldn't compete. The shogunate was forced to capitulate. This totally enraged the southern provinces, sparking a massive rebellion that finally toppled the shogunate and restored supreme power back to Emperor Meiji in 1868. And just like that, almost overnight, Japan swings fully back to foreign integration.
Absolutely terrified of being colonized by Western powers, the Meiji government went into hyperdrive to modernize. They're laying down railways, setting up telegraphs, lifting the ban on Christianity, and building a universal education system. They even brought in Western advisors for banking and law and completely overhauled their military tactics so they could stand toe-to-toe with Western empires.
Part 5. Empire and World War. Now, empowered by this massive industrial boom, Japan started seriously flexing its military muscles on the world stage. They pulled off stunning regional victories over China in 1895 and then, shockingly, defeated a Western power, Russia, in 1905. This really fueled aggressive expansionist ambitions. They annexed Korea, and soon enough, this quest for a massive colonial empire spiraled. It led to a disastrous geopolitical alignment with Germany and Italy, and eventually the fateful preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor in 1941. This ambition brought the world's most destructive conflict quite literally to Japan's doorstep. They faced relentless U.S. island-hopping campaigns and harsh economic sanctions that crippled their war effort. Ultimately, it culminated in the unimaginable devastation of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, causing well over 100,000 casualties. This forced Emperor Hirohito to publicly announce a full surrender, leading directly to the total demilitarization of the country and Allied occupation. Part 6. The Economic Miracle. From the literal ashes of World War II, Japan was forced to reinvent itself yet again. They shifted entirely away from military conquest and poured everything into democratic capitalist growth. Guided by Prime Minister Yoshida, the sheer speed of this rebirth is hard to wrap your head around. By 1955, just a decade later, they had already surpassed their pre-war economic output. And by 1968, Japan had transformed into the world's second largest capitalist economy, becoming an absolute titan in global tech and auto manufacturing. Ultimately, the big takeaway here, the real so what of this explainer, is that Japan's survival and its current status as a hyper-modern powerhouse rests entirely on the arduous work ethic and the sheer tenacity of its people. Even after total devastation, they managed to rebuild a modern nation-state that leads the world in innovation today, actively leaving behind the hostilities and divisiveness of their past. It really is a staggering 40,000-year story of adaptation. Knowing how violently the pendulum of Japan has swung between total lockdown isolation and eager global integration, it leaves us with one pretty massive question. As our world rapidly changes today, which way do you think Japan will swing next? Thanks so much for exploring this with me.